cool mist drifts over the rolling green hills of the English countryside. The morning dew clings to the petals of roses, some deep crimson, others a soft pale white. A gentle breeze stirs the hedgerows and flows through old stone archways, whispering of a time long past. Here, the air feels thick with history, as if the very soil remembers every footstep of a nobleman, every rustle of a royal cloak, every oath quietly sworn under the hush of twilight. Among winding lanes and timber-framed halls, two great houses once stirred beneath the surface of a kingdom. They shared a common lineage, but followed separate paths, each tracing their roots back through the tangled branches of royal ancestry. From these ancient trunks, two flowers bloomed, roses of contrasting hue, symbols of pride, power, and a growing sense of destiny. The War of the Roses was never just a series of battles. It was a long, slow unfolding of ambitions, loyalties, and dreams set against a backdrop of castles and countryside, where the sound of footsteps echoed through empty corridors and parchments sealed with wax carried secrets across the land. It was a quiet kind of war, one shaped by inheritance and heritage, where power shifted not only on the field, but within whispered decisions behind heavy oak doors. This evening, we'll drift through that world together. We'll wander through mist-laced meadows and stand beneath the crumbling towers of ancient keeps. We'll step gently into the shoes of kings and queens, of courtiers and knights, and of the many who watched history pass quietly outside their windows. And as we do, we'll allow the sounds of the past to soften until they become a lullaby carried on the wind. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, the podcast designed to lull you into a peaceful slumber with soothing stories through time, places, and ideas. Whether you're winding down after a long day or simply looking for a peaceful escape, you're in the right place. My name's Jack, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. Each night on Sleepy Journeys, we set off together on gentle adventures designed to soothe your mind and ease you into rest. You'll find journeys through history, comforting fairy tales, myths and folklore, the wonders of science, fascinating inventions, inspiring famous figures, music history, and even calm explorations around the world. No matter where your curiosity takes you, there's a dreamy Sleepy Journeys show for you. Tonight, we're going to embark on a gentle journey through the War of the Roses. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming sleepy adventures. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us. Now, take a deep breath, and let's begin. In a time before the roses stood opposed, England's crown rested on the heads of the Plantagenets. Their reign stretched across generations, marked by moments of brilliance and shadows of unrest. From the days of Edward III, the royal family bloomed like a tree, whose branches reached in many directions, each offshoot bearing the weight of noble duty and ancient bloodlines. Edward's sons grew into powerful figures, each establishing lines of descent that would echo through the kingdom. Among them were Lionel of Antwerp, Duke of Clarence, and John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster. While John's line gave rise to the House of Lancaster, Lionel's legacy passed through his daughter, filtering into what would become the House of York. These ties were forged in blood and lineage. At their core, Lancaster and York were family, bound by the same royal roots, drawn from the same noble tree. As generations passed, the lineages wound through marriages and inheritances, becoming increasingly entangled. The noble families built homes in shires scattered across the land, some nestled among soft hills and woodlands, others perched above rivers or hedged within quiet stone walls. Heraldic banners fluttered gently in the breeze, their symbols standing proud against the blue-gray skies. The claim to the throne, once clear, began to blur with time. While the Lancastrians had secured the crown through Henry IV, the Yorkists, tracing their descent through Lionel, quietly held to their belief in a stronger hereditary right. Though no battle had yet been fought, and no sword yet drawn, the seed of uncertainty had taken root. It grew slowly. At first, it was little more than a whisper, a question of legitimacy, murmured in shaded chambers. Over time, those whispers grew louder, passed down like stories around quiet hearths, until they settled deep within the ambitions of each house. These were silent reflections on destiny, honor, and the unseen turns of fate. The Plantagenets were a dynasty of strength and endurance. For over 3 centuries, they ruled England with a presence that stretched from royal courts to rugged borderlands. Their story begins with Henry II, a king of energy and fierce intellect whose rule set the foundation for a long line of successors. From him flowed a legacy of warriors, scholars, and rulers who carried the crown through storms of politics, war, and change. Edward III, one of the most admired of these kings, was a central figure in shaping the future split. His reign was marked by grandeur and ambition. He strengthened the monarchy and led military campaigns that captured the imagination of his people. Yet behind his public achievements lay the quiet seeds of division. With many sons, Edward's inheritance fractured through complexity. Each of his sons was given land, titles, and responsibilities. John of Gaunt became the Duke of Lancaster, establishing a line that would soon rise to prominence. Lionel of Antwerp, though less involved in governance, left behind a daughter whose lineage carried the blood of kings. Over time, these lines developed into the rival claims that would quietly surface generations later. But during Edward's reign, there was little sense of what was to come. The family appeared unified, the kingdom relatively stable. Castles bustled with life, hunting parties rode out at dawn, and courtiers practiced courtly manners beneath painted ceilings and candlelight. The soft hum of life in the Plantagenet era moved forward with grace, even as destiny plotted its gentle divergence. Symbols often speak more softly than words, yet they hold great power. The red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York were originally emblems of pride, tokens of identity gently worn in livery or displayed within gardens and tapestries. These blooms were chosen for beauty, simplicity, and their connection to heritage. The red rose, deep and velvety, came to represent the House of Lancaster. It evoked warmth, tradition, and a sense of royal legitimacy. Planted in manor gardens and embroidered into robes, it whispered of continuity and noble order. The white rose, pale and delicate, was the mark of the House of York. It suggested clarity, dignity, and the quiet resolve of those who believed in their ancestral right. It, too, appeared on shields, tapestries, and even in glass windows that caught the morning light in quiet stone chapels. These flowers bloomed in different corners of the same royal garden. For many years, they coexisted, seen as symbols of different branches of the same grand tree. Yet, as tension slowly gathered, their petals took on deeper meaning. People began to notice them more, where they were worn, what they represented. The colors began to mark sides, even before lines had been drawn. In villages and towns, the roses began to stir quiet allegiances. A merchant might nod respectfully to a house bearing red. A stonemason might favor a family who wore white. These were gentle signs of belonging. The conflict that would one day define them had not yet arrived, but in the soft hues of red and white, its early shadows began to stretch. Within the stone walls of Westminster, a gentle hush lingered beneath the vaulted ceilings. Light filtered softly through stained glass windows, scattering colors across the worn flags that hung above. Here, in the quiet corridors of power, something subtle had begun to shift. The rhythm of court life continued, cloaks rustling, quills scratching, courtiers offering low bows, but beneath the surface, questions stirred. The stillness of a kingdom held its breath. King Henry VI sat upon the throne, yet the weight of his crown was often too great for his gentle shoulders. He was a ruler more contemplative than commanding, a man who sought peace in a world that asked for firmness. His court, sensing the absence of strong leadership, began to stretch in many directions, like roots seeking nourishment where none was easily found. Around him, noble houses moved delicately. Their voices remained civil, their gestures courteous, yet tension wound between them like ivy creeping up stone. The king's advisors formed circles of influence, each with its own vision for the realm. Some spoke for Lancaster, others quietly leaned toward York. These were murmurs, carefully chosen words in shaded gardens, letters sealed in wax and delivered in silence. Beyond the court, the countryside remained peaceful but watchful. Local lords reinforced their holdings, summoned retainers, and took stock of their armories. Not for war, they claimed, but for order and readiness. In manor houses and churchyards, the talk of politics became more frequent, more careful. The realm was changing, but so slowly, it seemed almost imperceptible. Henry VI had inherited a kingdom shaped by strength and conquest, yet his nature was quiet and reserved. He was deeply pious, often found in prayer or contemplation, more comfortable in chapels than in council chambers. His voice was soft, his words often few. In times of peace, such qualities might have brought calm to the kingdom. But peace is rarely still for long. He came to the throne as an infant, following the death of his father, the famed warrior Henry V. While England mourned its heroic king, a regency was formed to govern in the young heir's name. And as Henry grew, the shadows of those early decisions lingered. The regents, advisors, and protectors each held their own vision for the crown's direction, planting the seeds of later division. As a young adult, Henry's mind often drifted into abstraction. He loved learning, encouraged the founding of educational institutions, and supported the church with devotion. But matters of state left him wearied and uncertain. When conflict arose between his nobles, He sought to smooth over the disputes rather than settle them. When bold choices were required, he hesitated. One moment stands quietly above the rest. In the midst of his reign, Henry suffered a long and mysterious spell of silence, an illness of the mind and spirit that left him withdrawn from the world. He neither spoke nor responded for months. The court functioned without his guidance, and the realm looked to others for leadership. In this void, the Duke of York, Richard Plantagenet, stepped forward. Though claiming only the protectorate during the king's indisposition, his presence stirred both admiration and unease. To some, he was a stabilizing force. To others, a reminder of a stronger claim than Lancaster wished to acknowledge. It was a long accumulation of silent divisions that turned England towards civil strife. One by one, noble houses aligned themselves more openly. The court no longer whispered just of policies, but of allegiances. Letters arrived bearing crests and intentions. Invitations to weddings and feasts began to reflect political leanings. Swords remained sheathed, yet the country felt the tightening pull of its own seams. The Queen, Margaret of Anjou, stepped into the void left by her husband's softness. Determined and resolute, she gathered strength where Henry offered prayer. Her loyalty to Lancaster never wavered, and her efforts to protect her son's inheritance were constant. She surrounded herself with trusted allies and viewed York's protectorate as a threat, not a safeguard. Meanwhile, in the north and west, support for York quietly gathered. His claim to the throne, traced through Lionel of Antwerp, gave many a reason to pause. He was known as thoughtful and able, a man who might bring order to a fraying realm. Yet, his intentions remained wrapped in careful language and tempered action. At least for now. In towns like Coventry and York, groups of retainers began training with more regularity. Fortified manor houses discreetly increased their stores of weapons and grain. Messages were sent to allies across borders, and quiet conversations turned toward the future. There was still no official break, no battle declared. But the realm was listening, to footsteps, to absences, to the changing tone of a herald's voice. And so the kingdom drifted toward war, with the steady hush of preparation. Among hedgerows and market squares, people sensed the change. The roses, once emblems of quiet lineage, now bore weight. One red, one white, two paths laid before a realm balanced between memory and momentum. The English countryside remained unchanged in its beauty, even as the winds of unrest moved gently across it. In spring, the meadows bloomed with wildflowers and grazing sheep. In autumn, the leaves turned gold and crimson, fluttering from trees that stood like silent witnesses to history. The land itself breathed calmly, though the people upon it were beginning to stir. Across the kingdom, men gathered in measured preparation. Lords summoned their retainers, polished their coats of arms, and counted the spears resting in storerooms. Scribes wrote names onto lists by candlelight, while blacksmiths shaped iron with rhythmic clangs that echoed like slow heartbeats. The work of war was beginning, but even now, it moved like a tide just beginning to rise, steadily, almost imperceptibly. The first battle came at Albans in 1455. It was a brief encounter, more a skirmish than a clash of empires. The town, with its quiet streets and ancient abbey, found itself suddenly the meeting place of two forces, one for the king, the other for the Duke of York. The stone walls of inns and churches heard the shuffle of boots and the low hum of anticipation. Birds scattered overhead. Merchants shuttered windows. It ended quickly. When the dust settled, a few lives had been lost, including key Lancastrian figures, but the realm did not yet fully awaken to the shape of the conflict. Instead, it exhaled a long breath and fell again into uneasy quiet. The roses, once more, lowered their petals toward the earth, as if unsure of the sun's warmth. But this was only the beginning. Like ripples moving outwards from a single stone, other battles would follow. They came with the low, steady roll of drums, the flutter of standards, and the calm resolve of men bound to duty. Before battle, there was often stillness. At dawn, mist curled along the edges of fields, weaving through hedgerows and curling around trees. In the camps, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth, wool, and the faint tang of iron. Men spoke softly, if at all, adjusting belts, checking saddles, or gazing silently toward the horizon. Knights moved among foot soldiers, their armor catching glints of gray light. Pages assisted in the tightening of straps, while messengers hurried between tents with folded instructions. These were the quiet routines of preparation, a practiced ballet of readiness, drawn from tradition and obligation. At the Battle of Wakefield in 1460, the snows had just begun to settle across Yorkshire. The cold was constant, biting gently at the skin, but never harsh. The Duke of York, stationed at Sandal Castle, ventured out to confront what he believed was a manageable force. Instead, he found himself outnumbered, and the landscape bore silent witness as the skirmish unfolded among the whitened fields. Even in loss, there was no roar of vengeance, no outcry across the hills. Those who remained gathered their fallen and returned home, leaving only footprints in the snow and a hush that seemed to stretch for miles. Among those lost was the Duke himself, and with his fall, the House of York momentarily recoiled. But from sorrow would rise a new purpose, quiet, deliberate, and certain. In the spring of 1461, the conflict reached its largest crescendo yet at Towton. Snow drifted across the vast field where thousands had gathered beneath gray skies. This was the collective breath of a country grappling with its identity. The wind carried the sound of flags fluttering, the distant neigh of horses, and the rhythm of movement on trodden earth. Men marched side by side, with the focused silence of those fulfilling a deeply rooted duty. They came from all over England, sons of farmers, retainers of nobles, quiet men who had known peace and now stood beneath unfamiliar skies. The snow thickened, softening every sound, blanketing the world in a kind of reverent quiet. When the clash came, it was sudden, yet still steeped in that same hush. The snow continued to fall. The cries of commanders were muffled by wind and distance. Towton became the largest battle of the War of the Roses, and yet, in the grand sweep of time, it remained a single, solemn page in a far longer story. As the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened, the land gradually cleared. The snow, disturbed by footsteps and wheels, began to cover all once more. The survivors walked back across the field in silence, heads bowed, the red and white roses each retreating for a time. What had begun as a ripple had become a wave, and yet still, the realm was not shattered. It simply adjusted, like a tree reshaping after wind. In the midst of a kingdom slowly reshaped by conflict, two figures emerged with grace and resolve. One was a queen whose spirit never wavered. The other, a nobleman whose influence flowed like a river beneath the calm surface of royal affairs. Together, they helped to guide the War of the Roses. Queen Margaret of Anjou stood as a pillar of determination during a time when her husband, King Henry VI, often faded into quietude. Though born across the sea in France, she adapted to her new land with sharp intelligence and unwavering loyalty. In the soft halls of court and the winding paths of diplomacy, she moved with purpose. Her love for her son, Edward of Westminster, grounded her, giving strength to each decision she made. Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, was a man of strategy and perception. Though never crowned, he wielded power that reached into every corner of the realm. He did not rule by force alone, but through the placement of influence, careful alliances, arranged marriages, and calculated shifts of loyalty. Known in later years as the Kingmaker, his legacy was not in titles held, but in the paths he quietly shaped. As the conflict deepened, both Margaret and Warwick navigated the shifting loyalties of the kingdom. They rarely stood still, moving across the landscape with retinues and letters, meetings and declarations. They were never far from the heart of events, though they often remained just beyond the center of attention, guiding, steering, adjusting. Their stories orbited each other, influencing the same stage from different wings. One fought for her husband and child, the other for order and legacy. Yet together, they reveal a truth that lies beneath many great conflicts, that strength can be soft-spoken, and that the greatest power often walks in quiet steps. Margaret of Anjou arrived in England as a young bride, yet quickly grew into her role as queen with a fierce and calm dignity. The court she entered was already divided, and her husband's gentle nature often left space she quietly stepped in to fill. While Henry turned inward during periods of reflection or illness, Margaret faced outward, listening, deciding, and guiding those around her. Her love for her son was the root of her resolve. Edward, Prince of Wales, was her legacy and purpose. In him, she saw the continuation of Lancaster's rightful claim, and she guarded that future with a mother's devotion. She spoke with nobles, negotiated with allies, and rode at the head of her supporters when needed. Each step she took was grounded in clarity and care. Margaret was no stranger to adversity. Throughout the war, she moved across the country and even across borders, seeking support when fortunes waned. In exile, she did not falter. In return, loyal supporters rallied around her, not only out of allegiance to Lancaster, but out of respect for the quiet strength she displayed. Even in moments of loss, her resolve did not break. After setbacks on the battlefield or changes in political fortune, Margaret simply adjusted her path, continuing forward. Her influence lingered in decisions made and alliances forged, shaping the course of the war with every thoughtful gesture. In portraits painted long after her time, Margaret is often shown with a rose in hand and a calm, steady gaze. These images carry truth. She was never the loudest voice in the room, but her presence left deep and lasting echoes. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, belonged to the House of York, yet his influence flowed far beyond family lines. He was a nobleman of wealth and charm, a host of great banquets, and a negotiator whose word carried weight. But beneath the pleasantries, Warwick was always watching, measuring, arranging, and preparing. He was instrumental in helping Edward of York rise to the throne as Edward IV. With calculated precision, Warwick moved the pieces that made Edward's claim viable, from securing key allies to ensuring popular support. His title of Kingmaker came from foresight. He understood the balance of power, and he learned to tip the scale with gentle confidence. Warwick's allegiance, however, was never blind. As Edward's reign matured, tension slowly grew between the new king and the noble who had elevated him. Warwick desired a greater voice in court, a stronger role in determining foreign policy. When that influence began to wane, he quietly reconsidered his place. Alliances shifted with deliberate recalibration. He turned briefly against Edward, supporting the restoration of Henry VI in a surprising and temporary realignment. This move was born of careful judgment, an assessment of what the realm might require, and how his vision for stability could still be achieved. Like a master gardener, Warwick pruned where needed, adjusted when required, and sought always the flourishing of a kingdom that might yet find balance. Ultimately, his influence would reach its end. Yet even in his fall, the impact of his choices remained. The kings he helped rise, the wars he prolonged or paused, the lineages he connected through marriage, each thread remained tightly woven into the fabric of English history. As the years passed, the roses continued to bloom, though fewer now adorned the halls of power without burden. The air across England had grown heavier, yet still carried the faint fragrance of change. The fields that once echoed with footsteps now lay quiet. The nobles who had risen and fallen were replaced by others, younger and determined, each walking the same stone paths their forebears had known. In this late stage of the War of the Roses, a new figure emerged, one both familiar and uncertain. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, brother to King Edward IV, took the crown following the king's death. His rule was brief, shadowed by questions and softened only by the enduring presence of ritual and heritage. As Richard III, he moved through royal duties with formality and grace, though doubt clung like mist around his name. The transition from Edward's reign to Richard's was marked by silence. His nephews, Edward V and his younger brother, vanished from view, their absence leaving an ache that no decree could ease. The Tower of London, with its stone walls and ivy-draped walkways, held stories no one would fully tell. And so, Richard reigned, alone in many ways, carrying a crown that seemed reluctant to rest. But even as the crown passed into his hands, a quiet force was stirring across the sea. Henry Tudor, a distant descendant of the Lancastrian line, prepared with slow intention. He gathered those who had grown weary of conflict, those who yearned for union, and those who wished for a different ending. Among them was a hope for victory and peace. In 1485, the two paths met at Bosworth Field. Morning mist covered the earth as if protecting it one final time. The soldiers of Richard and Henry moved with solemn awareness. The War of the Roses had run its course, and now it came to rest. Richard III's rise to the throne was shaped by necessity and opportunity. After Edward IV's death, his young son was named heir, but the path to coronation grew complicated. Richard, as Lord Protector, took guardianship seriously, yet soon claimed the crown for himself. He cited issues of legitimacy, though many questioned the motives behind his actions. Still, Richard ruled with the dignity of one who believed in duty. He journeyed across the kingdom, holding court in towns and listening to petitions. His decisions were deliberate. Laws were reviewed, taxes carefully adjusted, and efforts made to address grievances. Yet all was shadowed by the weight of the past, the mystery of the princes in the Tower, and the whispered uncertainty that followed his every move. His emblem, a white boar, stood firm on standards above castle gates. His voice, though clear and measured, never fully reached the hearts of those still loyal to Edward's line. The old wounds had not healed, and new ones threatened to form. Though his rule sought structure, the soil beneath it remained unsettled. And so Richard prepared. When news reached him that Henry Tudor had landed in Wales, he did not retreat. He gathered his forces, rode out to meet fate, and placed his faith in the strength of loyalty. Bosworth would be his answer to every quiet question, every unspoken doubt. It would be his final act, and the close of one chapter in the kingdom's long tale. Henry Tudor's return to England was thoughtful. He landed with a modest army, supported by loyal exiles and cautious allies. He walked slowly, building each step with care. Along the way, more supporters joined, drawn by the hope that he might end the war at last. His claim was unique. Though Lancastrian in blood, he proposed unity. In his vision stood the possibility of reconciliation, of bringing together the red and the white into one. His intentions were whispered in manor halls and written into promises. Marry Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, and bind the kingdom with peace. At Bosworth, the day broke with haze and quiet. The armies faced one another under a sky that threatened both storm and stillness. Richard led his men with confidence. Henry, calm and steady, remained just behind the front, watching and waiting. The fighting was brief by historical standards, but the outcome reshaped history. When Richard fell, the crown that had adorned his head was found beneath a hawthorn bush. It was lifted with care. Henry Tudor received it with silence, standing as one who had accepted the great weight of healing. A new dynasty would begin by weaving the past into something new. The last rose had bloomed. As the sun rose over a land worn by years of quiet struggle, the colors of both red and white began to blend softly in the minds of the people. The War of the Roses, with its winding chapters and shifting tides, had left its mark. Across villages and valleys, there was a sense of stillness settling into place, as if the very landscape had sighed in relief. Henry VII's ascension to the throne brought more than a change in leadership. It ushered in a vision of unity. True to his promise, he married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV and a symbol of the York legacy. Their union was a quiet binding of wounds. It signaled a desire to end division, to bring balance to the crown, and to restore calm to the realm. From their marriage bloomed a symbol that would endure for generations, The Tudor row. A graceful blend of the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, it stood as a gentle reminder that reconciliation could grow from even the most tangled roots. It appeared on royal standards, carved into stone and embroidered onto rich tapestries. Wherever it bloomed, it carried with it a soft promise of peace. The battles quieted. The court turned its focus inward, toward rebuilding and reform. New laws were shaped through careful discussion. Castles that once echoed with preparations for conflict now welcomed celebrations, music, and the calm rhythm of daily life. England, once divided by colors and claims, began to walk as one again. And though the roses no longer marked sides, they continued to bloom, tended in royal gardens, planted beside churches, and woven into the hearts of the people. The Tudor rose was born from symbolism, yet its petals carried a very real sense of resolution. A gentle flower that stood at the center of a new dynasty, it merged the identities of two proud houses into a single, quiet harmony. Its design was simple and elegant, a white rose nestled within a red one, their outlines overlapping in a perfect circle. Each petal touched the other in embrace. It adorned coins and manuscripts, stained glass and banners, always reminding those who saw it of the unity that had been achieved. In gardens across the realm, roses were planted to mirror the symbol. Some bore only red or white, while others grew side by side. Their blooms swayed gently in the wind, watched by children who no longer knew the fear of civil war. The Tudor rose became part of the language of peace, a way for the past to speak softly to the present. Artists painted it into portraits of Henry and Elizabeth, while poets wrote verses that praised its beauty and balance. It became more than an emblem of a house. It became a symbol of England itself, resilient, graceful, and capable of transformation. Where once the roses had stood apart, they now stood together. The kingdom that emerged after the war was steadier. The countryside no longer watched for banners on the horizon. Instead, it listened to the softer sounds of plows returning to fields, of bells ringing from village churches, and of conversation drifting from market stalls. In the royal court, voices lowered in tone. Disputes were settled with patience. The memory of conflict remained, but it no longer drove the future. Instead, it became part of the collective story, a chapter closed, a lesson learned. For those who had lived through the long years of division, the change felt profound. Children born during the war now grew in peace. Old wounds, both personal and political, began to heal in the rhythm of daily life. Manor houses reopened their gates. Noble families found themselves less drawn to opposition and more to shared purpose. The reign of Henry VII continued this quiet course. His attention to detail, his careful governance, and his desire to strengthen the crown without inciting fear allowed the kingdom to breathe. The wars had ended in a soft settling of the dust. And in this calm, the people of England began once more to dream of gardens, festivals, and futures gently blooming. The War of the Roses had ended. The kingdom was at rest. The fields lie still beneath the evening sky, blanketed in soft twilight. Roses, once symbols of division, now rest quietly in the gardens, red and white nestled beside one another, their petals catching the last light of day. The breeze carries the scent of grass and distant lavender, brushing gently through the hedgerows and whispering among the leaves. Castles that once watched over the land in anxious silence now seem to exhale. Their stone walls are warm with age, their towers softened by ivy and time. The echo of footsteps on flagstone halls has quieted to a lull, a rhythm that marks peace rather than preparation. The flicker of candles in arched windows signals rest, not vigilance. Even the great halls, once the sites of strategy and debate, are now spaces of warmth, lit hearths, shared meals, and the murmur of stories passed from one generation to the next. In the countryside, meadows roll gently beneath the stars. Sheep settle into their folds, and owls begin their soft songs from high branches. Lanterns glow in distant cottages, their lights spilling faintly onto pathways that wind past streams and hedges. The world feels settled, as though the land itself remembers what once was and welcomes what has become. The tale of the War of the Roses is one of legacy, of reconciliation. It reminds us that even the most winding paths can lead back to stillness, that even divided roots may bloom together once more. The Tudor rose remains, not only on monuments and manuscripts, but in the memory of unity achieved through quiet endurance. As we leave behind the halls of Westminster and the fields of Bosworth, as we drift from the shadowed towers of York and the softened hills of Lancaster, let us return to that first vision of mist curling over dewy meadows, of roses heavy with morning light, and of a kingdom wrapped in the hush of dawn. You've traveled through centuries tonight, gently carried by stories and symbols, by the footsteps of queens, kings, and those who walked beside them. And now, it's time to let the story settle, like dust after a long journey, like petals falling softly to the ground. Let your breath ease. Let your thoughts slow. Let the hush of history carry you into rest. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I hope it brought you a little peace, a little wonder, and a little closer to rest. Until next time, sweet dreams.